Hello, class. Here I'm bringing to you the third part of the video on Americanism. I hope you watched the first two parts thoroughly, besides the other videos and materials posted thus far. So please take down the notes where you need and when you need, and connect this video to the ones you've listened to or watched before. American words in General English. The difference between the British and the American lexicon today is lessened by the fact that many American words have made their way into British English, and their number appears to be increasing rather than diminishing. Often they have had to make their way against long and bitter opposition. The verbs to advocate, placate, and antagonize were buried under a literature of protest during most of the 19th century. This is not true of most of the early words adopted by the colonies from the Native Americans for Native American things. Other words associated with American things have at times been accepted fairly readily. For example, telephone, phonograph, typewriter, ticker, prairie, they are all familiar examples. Some American political terms, especially those associated with less admirable practices, have also been taken in. For example, caucus, logrolling, graft, to stump, among others. It is easy to recognize the American origin of such words as to lynch, blizzard, jazz, joyride, bucket shop, etc. But in many other cases, the American origin of a word has been forgotten, or the word has been so completely accepted in British that the dictionaries do not think it important any longer to state the fact. Generally speaking, it may be said that when an American word expresses an idea in a way that appeals to the British as fitting or effective, the word is ultimately adopted in Britain. Ernest Weekly, in his Adjectives and Other Words, says, quote, "It is difficult now to imagine how we got on so long without the word stunt, how we expressed their characteristics so conveniently summed up in dope fiend or highbrow, or any other possible way of describing that mixture of a cheap, pathetic, and the ludicrous which is now universally labeled sub stuff." Unquote. It is difficult to determine how large the debt of English is to the American vocabulary, but in the last 200 years, it has probably exceeded the debt of English to any other source. Scientific interest in American English. Apart from the interest in Americanisms, which, as we have seen, goes back to the beginning of the 19th century, considerable study of American English as a branch of English philology developed during the 20th century. It began with the investigation by individual scholars of particular dialects or regional characteristics. Pioneers in the field were George Hempel, Charles Grandgent, and O. F. Emerson. Interest in American dialects led to the formation in 1889 of the American Dialect Society, which published a journal called Dialect Notes. The Society now issues PADS, Publications of the American Dialectal Society. In 1919, H. L. Mencken published a book of nearly 500 pages, which he called The American Language. This contained a large amount of entertaining and valuable material presented in a popular way and had the effect of stimulating a wider interest in the subject. It has gone through four editions, and subsequently, two supplements were published in 1945 and 1948, both larger than the original book. A few years later, a magazine called American Speech was launched, in which popular and technical discussions appear as evidence of the twofold appeal that American English has for the people of this country. In 1925, George Crabb published the first comprehensive and scholarly treatment of American English in his two-volume work. This is the work of a philologist, but is not without its attraction for the lay person. Subsequently, there have been prepared and published at the University of Chicago a Dictionary of American English on Historical Principles, edited by Sir William Craigie and James Hulbert, and a Dictionary of Americanisms on Historical Principles, the work of Mitford Matthews, also appeared. An American dictionary comparable to Joseph Wright's English Dialect Dictionary has been the goal of the American Dialect Society since its founding. The Dictionary of American Regional English, under the editorship of Frederick Cassidy, achieves the goal and provides an invaluable account of American dialects as they were recorded between 1965 and 1970. The 5 year period of fieldwork is more than 1,000 communities in all 50 states, provides an almost instantaneous picture in comparison with the time required for most dialect surveys. The publication of Linguistic Atlas of the United States and Canada began in 1939. Although conceived as a single enterprise, the various regional projects have evolved into a series of independent but closely connected investigations. In this undertaking, America has followed the lead of Europe. In the latter part of the 19th century, there began to grow an interest in the study of the geographic distribution of linguistic phenomena. Apart from the value of such study in ensuring the preservation of accurate records of dialects and even languages that were in the process of dying out, it was seen that it might play an important role in linguistic science. The best way to study the phenomena of linguistic evolution and change is in the living speech of communities whose origin, cultural development, and revelation to other communities can still be traced. Accordingly, there have been published or are in the course of preparation linguistic atlases for more than a dozen European speech areas, notably French, German, and Italian. The proposal for an American atlas was made in 1928 at a meeting of the Modern Language Association and independently at a session of the Linguistic Society. With the support of the American Council of Learned Societies, work was begun in 1931 under the direction of Professor Hans Kurrat of the University of Michigan. The portion of the atlas covering the New England states was published during the first 12 years of the project, the data being presented graphically in a series of 730 maps. Records of the speech of some 200 communities were made for this purpose. In each community, at least two informants are selected. Number one, an elderly representative of the long established families whose speeches felt to be old fashioned. And number two, a representative of the middle aged group who has not had too much schooling and has preserved, in the main, the local type of speech. The history of the settlement is traced, and generally a fairly full history of the individual informant is obtained before he or she is approached. The material collected covers pronunciation, grammatical forms, syntactical usages, and vocabulary, and is obtained by means of a carefully prepared questionnaire designed to bring out the most characteristic dialectal features known or suspected. The answers are recorded in phonetic notation and supplemented by phonograph records and tapes. A half century after the publication of the Linguistic Atlas of New England, the volumes for Upper Midwest or Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota, and for the Gulf states, which are Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and East Texas have appeared, and materials for most of the other regions have been collected or are well advanced. Even in their unedited and unpublished form, they have been the source of for a number of regional studies. Any large project that requires several decades to record features of a language will encounter the problem of changes in the language as well as changes in the methods of studying human institutions. In the half century since the inception of the linguistic atlas, both kinds of change have occurred at a rapid state in the United States. While the atlas field workers were recording rural linguistic items from older settled speakers, American society was becoming increasingly mobile and urban. In recent years, linguists have turned most of the attention to the complex patterns of speech in the cities of the United States. William Labov's work has been especially influential in its application of techniques from sociology to the description of urban speech. In studying the social varieties of English, Labov and others have attempted to observe the language in its social setting outside the artificial context of an interview. The methodological conclusions that these linguists have drawn from their trials, failures, and successes in recording urban English are as important as their descriptions of particular pronunciations or systematic structures. Labov argues that the lack of verbal ability and logic that some linguists find in non-standard English is the result of asking the wrong questions in the wrong situations and then analyzing the answers within the investigator's linguistic system rather than the subject's. If the practical implications that have been drawn from recent sociolinguistic studies are often contradictory, the contradictions are hardly surprising at our present state of understanding. It is unrealistic to expect the discipline of social linguistics, which has only recently acquired its name, to provide immediate solutions to problems that are rooted not only in the stratification of the language, but also in the society that the language reflects. At the same time that linguistic geography and sociolinguistics were contributing so much to our knowledge, of the language of the United States in its regional and social aspects, the study of American English was making great advances in one other direction, and that is its basic structure. In the 19th century and the early part of the 20th centuries, the interests of linguistic scholars were mainly historical and comparative. Such studies, of course, did constitute a large and important field of scholarship. But with the increasing interest in the United States in the recording and interpretation of the languages of native speak Americans, new procedures were found to be necessary to deal with structures totally different from those of the languages most familiar to us, the languages of Europe and Western Asia. In the new approach, Franz Boas and his pupil Edward Sapir were the pioneers, and their work was supplemented and continued by Leonard Bloomfield. The publication in 1933 of Bloomfield's book Language, the most important work on general linguistics in the first half of the 20th century, marked a turning point in American linguistic scholarship. The methods that had proved their worth in the study of Native American languages began to be applied to the study of American English and other modern languages. Starting with the premise that any language is a structural system of arbitrary signals, here conceived of as vocal sounds, structural linguistics sought to determine which elements, including stress, intonation, pauses, etc., are significant and to describe the pattern in which they are organized. It began with phonetic analysis and proceeded from there to morphology and syntax. It generally ignored semantics or the study of meaning. Now comes the role of the famous linguist Noam Chomsky, which is still alive today. In 1957, Noam Chomsky presented a radically different model of language in a thin technical book entitled Syntactic Structures. Instead of beginning the description with phonology, as the structuralists who followed Bloomfield had done, Chomsky began with syntax and argued that the part of the grammar that describes syntactic structures should have priority as the creative component. By this view, the other two major parts of grammar, semantics and phonology, are interpretive components, the purpose of which is to act upon and assign meaning and sound to the structures generated by the syntax. In characterizing the syntactic component of grammar as creative, Chomsky brought attention to a certain obvious but easily overlooked facts about English and every other natural language, and he pointed out inadequacies in existing systems of descriptive grammar. The fact that speakers of English can recognize and produce sentences which they have never before encountered suggests that the grammar which describes English must provide for infinite syntactic novelty. But the grammar itself must be a finite thing. If one assumes that a goal of linguistic description is to account for the knowledge, or in a technical sense of the word, the competence of a native speaker of a language, Chomsky sketched a model of a grammar that was unlike existing grammars in its ability to generate an infinite number of sentences from a finite set of rules. In addition, he formalized the kind of rule necessary to show certain relationships of meaning, as, for example, between an active sentence and its corresponding passive form. These rules, which show relationships, are known as transformational rules, and the system of description is known as generative grammar. Mechanical structures alone cannot form meaningful sentences. To exemplify this, Chomsky composes this famous sentence: colorless green ideas sleep furiously, in his book Syntactic Structures. This sentence has become a famous example of how grammatical accuracy is not enough to form a meaningful sentence. Okay, folks, that's all I have for this video on Americanism. We watched the three parts on Americanism. There is some more that you can read in your textbook. Thanks for watching patiently. The content of this video is drawn from your textbook, A History of the English Language. Please read the chapter English Language in America and let me know if you have any questions. You all have a nice day.